Hello there, listeners. This is an audio recording of my book, The Westwind Tales of Sword and Sand, which is book 1 in the Westwind Tales series. If you like what you hear, consider subscribing, leaving a like or a comment, or preferably all of the above. If you want more content like this, consider supporting the channel by purchasing my book on Amazon, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or, preferably, both. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea, and enjoy the chapter. Confused, he moved on from the tattoo and continued studying himself in the mirror. Across his form were scattered a multitude of distinct scars. Some, as long as his forearm, stretched diagonally from one side of his body to the other in thin streaks. Others were small, round, and discolored. Kel's hands began to tremble. He could feel a memory begin to surface. Grasping the edge of the dresser for support, Kel relaxed and opened his thoughts. Memory flooded his mind. A red sun sunk low on the horizon. The stench of burning flesh filled his nostrils. Kel blinked as what lay before him faded into focus. Fire littered the landscape. Trees burned. Smoke rose from the ground. And his fingertips tingled with magic. The memory took over his thoughts, caught him up in its flow. He raised his hands in front of him and called forth his power. Fire shot from his palms as he targeted movement behind the tree line. Screams erupted from the foliage, and two figures burst forth, flailing their arms in a vain attempt to extinguish the flames that blanketed them. As they struggled, he turned and ran along the tree line towards the sinking sun. He came upon a group of 10 or so men in a circle, his men. They were hemmed in on all sides by figures in dark armor, numbering twice as many. The men were bleeding, hunched from fatigue, and breathing heavily. Their eyes, however, were determined. Swords at the ready, the surrounded men deflected blows and thrusts from the warriors who were circling them like wolves. He reached with his left hand to his right hip and drew his sword. The ring of his steel caused one of the trapped soldiers to look up. Their eyes met, and relief flooded into the soldier's gaze, replacing the grim determination of a cornered beast. A confident grin now spread across his weary face as he shouted, "Stormhand!" The other soldiers, as well as those encircling them, jerked their heads toward where he stood, sword in hand. Murmurs of hope rose from the men. "Stormhand! Lord Stormhand has come!" One of the wolfish warriors lifted a hand towards Kel. A deep hum filled the air as the warrior let loose a burst of destructive magic. It raged towards him, a lance of pure energy screeching through the air like a bolt of blue lightning, aimed at his chest. Kel grunted to himself. Damn flashcasters, don't know the first thing about battle magic. With a casual flick of his right hand, he countered the flashcast with its resonant spell form, causing the projectile to fizzle out in midair, change direction, and vanish in a pathetic burst of sparks and smoke. When he had first joined the war, he had memorized many flashcast spell forms to be like the other soldiers, but he had given them up after discovering just how ineffective they were against properly trained magi. The warriors in dark armor froze for a brief moment before breaking away from the soldiers they had surrounded and rushing at him with swords swinging. The huddled group of men who had looked so weary only seconds before let loose a cry and gave chase with renewed strength. As the warriors bore down on him, his hands sped into motion. With his left hand, he readied his sword into a defensive position, while, with his right hand, he hurled a ball of magical fire into their midst. Scattering, the warriors circled around him in the same fashion as they had previously trapped the soldiers. Half of their number whirled around and launched themselves into the pursuing men, cutting them down with deadly efficiency. He realized at that moment what he was up against. These were mountain elves. Their faces were painted with red streaks upon their ashen skin. Their pointed ears stuck out from their matted scarlet hair, and their teeth were bared in arrogant snarls. Taking a deep breath, he calmed his mind, isolating his fury, his anger at the slaughter of his men, harnessing it. As the elves leapt forward, his sword spun in arcs around his body, defending against the attacking weapons. Steel hit steel, his blood boiled in his veins, his heart pounded in his ears. He was ready. Changing techniques, his sword danced in and out of the elves' defenses. Within the space of a heartbeat, several fell under his blade. The elves scrambled backward and began to cautiously circle him. Their demeanor had changed as well. The arrogant grins were replaced with mouths closed in consternation. It had been a mistake to attack him individually. In unison, the elves began to slowly close the distance between him and their swords. He unleashed his fury. Flame engulfed his body as a cloak. The startled elves leapt back too late. His sword, glowing like molten iron, cut through their armor like a sickle through wheat. Severed limbs fell to the earth. Viscera splattered against his plate mail cuirass and sizzled as his fire devoured it. Hot blood ran down his blade, across his gauntlets, and dripped off his elbows. Their feeble attempts at swordplay quickly gave way to frantic parries and blocks. Their eyes went wide with fear as the realization of whom they fought settled on them. Stormhand, the fire mage of the 9th Legion. 5 had fallen, and then 10, and then 15, as he spun effortlessly about in their midst, his strength and speed enhanced by the magic flowing through him. The infernal cloak around his body spread to the corpses at his feet. The remaining 2 cursed at him, and then tried to run, slipping in the blood of their slain comrades. With a raised hand, Stormhand consumed them with fire as they fell. Closing his eyes, he quenched his rage into embers. The fire enveloping him burned low and disappeared. With a soiled hand, he wiped the blood from his face and let out a breath. Turning from the burning corpses beneath him, he marched towards the setting sun. Kell breathed in deeply. His knees were weak and his hand ached from gripping the dresser. Who am I? He moved to the bed and sat down gingerly, wincing at his sudden stiffness. With a finger, he traced some of the scars on his chest. He felt another memory coming. Laying back on the bed, he closed his eyes and tried to relax. Memory flooded his mind. A red sun sunk low on the horizon. Dried blood caked the steel bracers upon his forearms, and charred flesh stuck to his breastplate and placard. He had reached the camp. As he trudged into the mass of tents, soldiers and camp followers alike saluted him as he passed. A page boy rushed to bring him a goblet steaming with spiced wine, which he accepted gratefully with a nod. The boy dashed away again with a beaming smile. The hot liquid sent shivers down his back and brought life back into his aching limbs. The day had taken its toll on him. Murmurs and whispers spread through the camp as he passed cook fires surrounded by exhausted men, staring blankly into the glimmering coals. Stormhand had returned, and he had returned alone. He realized that he must look like an Orla, a ghoul from the children's fey tales, all covered with blood and scurf, but he left it for his men to see. Morale among the soldiers lasted longer when they knew their commanders fought as hard as they. Pain began to seep into his joints as he headed toward his tent, which lay near the center of the camp. The page, who had brought him the wine, joined him at his side. "Did you find the last of the stragglers, my lord Stormhand?" Kell remembered leading a small party of men 3 days before, in an attempt to discover the location of an elven raiding party. They had been ambushed by the very elves that they were sent to locate. Cruel irony, if I've ever known it, he thought. His party had been scattered. When he made it back to the Legion encampment and found that his men still hadn't returned, he immediately left to find them again. Looking down at the boy, he smiled. "I told you not to call me that, my boy. Stormhand's not my name. And yes, I found them, for all the good it did. The bloody elves slaughtered them before my eyes." He glanced to the ground and sighed. "I want this cursed war to end." Page nodded seriously, staring up at him. "When do you think it will end, my lord Edmund?" He looked into the page's bright golden eyes and sighed again. "I don't know, Gadwall. The mountain elves will never surrender. It's not their nature." He gestured at the soldiers as they passed them by. "The men in this camp are exhausted. There's no fight left in them. It isn't something a hot meal and a good rest can fix either." He glanced around and continued in a lower voice. "A bad feeling, my boy. Believe this war will end soon, one way or another." Normally, Edmund would have put on a more positive face, but after what he had seen that night, there was no optimism left in him. Gadwall clenched his jaw and nodded. The boy was young, but the war had forced him to grow. His dirty blonde hair fell into his face as he shook his head. "One way or another," muttered Gadwall in return. Edmund smiled and began to say something a little more comforting when an object struck him in the back. Hard. He stumbled forward and turned his head to see what had hit him. it was a black-shafted arrow. 2 more arrows flew out of the night and stuck into his chest, punching through his breastplate with enormous force. He staggered to his knees and gasped for the breath that had been knocked from his lungs. These weren't arrows, they were bolts from a crossbow. Gadwall knelt quickly by his side, fear laced his eyes. His mouth worked, unsure of what to do. Edmund managed to gasp in a breath and seized Gadwall's shirt with his fist. Pulling him down to his level, he looked intently into his eyes. "Listen to me, Gadwall," he winced and then coughed, splattering blood onto the page boy's shirt. "I want you to run." Gadwall shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "No, my lord, I won't leave you. I can fight." Edmund shook him roughly, groaning as pain shot through his chest. "No! You will die with the rest of us if you stay." He shoved him towards the edge of the camp opposite the attack. "The main army is 2 days south of here. Run!" Gadwall froze for a moment before nodding grimly. "Farewell, my lord. Good luck." Turning, he bolted out of the camp and into the dark shadows that surrounded them. Edmund bowed his head to his chest and slowly pulled in a painful, gurgling breath. "Damn elves! This bloody war! Just want it to end." The cries of dying men filled the night. A tear rolled down Kell's cheek as he opened his eyes. "My name is Edmund." Well, that wraps up this chapter. Stay tuned for the next chapter of the Westwind Tales of Sword and Sand coming soon. In the meantime, you can head over to Amazon and pick up your very own copy. The link is in the description. Leave a comment and a like, make sure to subscribe for more content, and until next time, enjoy the adventure.